Boo. No intro. That was easy, wasn't it? Welcome to The Last Rites. I think it's episode 51. It will say on whatever you've clicked on. You can figure it out. Clearly very tired today, and I've no idea why. No idea what happened on the 50th episode, but don't worry about it. Just go and check it out later. Not all 8 hours of it. It got a little bit crazy. What I will say, no Jamie Dykes. He's in bed. And maybe we'll explain that later. Maybe he'll be in the chat. We'll find out. But what we do have is a very special guest today. I feel he's been living in my head because I've been listening to his book. I've been reading his book and watching his podcast. But you all know him, veteran of comedy, and of course from the Howard Stern Show for 18 years, I believe. So please welcome to Last Rites, Mr. Joke Man Martling. Hey, how you doing?
I thought I was doing all right, Carl, till I saw I didn't know what the name of the show is. The Last Rites. Does that mean this is like my last stop before I'm out of show business?
I renamed it just for you. It was called Butterflies and Sunshine, and then I saw you were coming, and I thought I'd rename it.
It's all over. Hey, nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too. So what you been up to recently?
Well, they put out a documentary on me that was finished just when the pandemic shifted into high gear. So that's been sitting waiting. And then we wanted to put it in film festivals. And the film festivals decided that maybe they'd rather have something besides a story of a guy from a nice neighborhood who tells filthy jokes, even though I'm a poor kid, you know. And so we haven't gotten into any film festivals. So we're chomping at the bit. We had like one screening here on Long Island. Everybody loves our podcast. Everybody loves our documentary, but we're still trying to get it somewhere, and we got it submitted. So that's been the main thing on my plate. That's been one of those major things where there's absolutely nothing happening. I'm still doing some shows, but I don't know what it's like. It's just so weird here because you book a show and then it gets canceled. Then you put it back in. And then the show comes off, and people are so thrilled when you finally do a show. Somebody's so excited to get out and see somebody live and buy your book and have a conversation. But it's so goddamn frustrating. And I just started my own podcast called Stand Up Memories with another guy. I've known him for 40 years. So we're telling stories from forever ago. If it's interesting to anybody, who knows? We're doing it.
It is interesting. It is. I was going to say you covered loads of stuff already. The podcast is great. I caught the premiere for the first episode last week. I've just watched episode 2 just now.
That's very flattering. I had no idea you even knew.
Yeah. I'm sure. I've been following it since it came up, and obviously heard about what you were doing through Matt Napo, and I've just been following it. So it's all interesting. I love those old stories. I love.
You know, Carl. I don't know. I hate to say it, but like in 2 days, I'm going to be 74. And I was on the cutting edge of everything. I had an album out when I'd been a comedian for 6 months in 1979.
Yeah.
I was so ahead of the curve tech-wise. But now I'm so behind the ball. I don't know the protocol as far as if I'm on your podcast, is it okay to say I have a podcast? It's like going on the Jay Leno show and saying, hey, I'm on Letterman tomorrow night.
That's what I want you to say. I want you to say, promote. It's about you. Let's have a conversation. You can talk about whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. Yeah, of course it is.
Okay, I'm on Letterman tomorrow night.
Is he still alive?
So
I'll tell you what, Jackie.
That's nice to know. You know, it's so much fun. We've done 20 shows, and we haven't even had a guest yet. They asked me to do a podcast, and I asked my old friend Peter to sit with me and be my first guest. And by the time we were done with the show, I said, you know what? We should be doing this together. We've done 20 shows, 20, I think about 10 hours. We haven't talked to anybody else. I think we barely spoke to the cameraman. We're just so enthused with each other and our horse crap stories. And meanwhile, both of us kind of know each other's stories, but not up close and personal. So it's, you know how this game is. You never know what's interesting to anybody else. You know, it's interesting to you, but it's a guessing game, right? Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. You never know what's going to go over. But here's what I like about any podcast: if it feels authentic, if it's a real conversation about something that you're really interested in, I think enough people will get it. And I find that with Stand Up Memories, you and Peter you've clearly got a friendship and a rapport, and it comes right across, and it just puts me right into those stories. And the same, I've been listening to your book this week. Actually, I'm about halfway through, so forgive me, I haven't finished it, but it's fascinating just to stick me straight into the early 70s in comedy, you know, when you're putting out that first album. And
all right, listen, Carl Mann, even if you're lying, you made
I'm not
my
lying,
month.
man.
You made my month. Now, before we go any further, where am I talking to?
You are talking to the UK. I'm in a city called Cardiff right now. I'm from near London. I'll be moving again soon. So yeah, I'm over in the UK. I'm a gutter level comedian trying to like rear my head out of begging for things. And I just
let
have
me
a
ask you,
podcast.
when you say near London, does that mean a suburb or like 10 miles or 300 miles or?
So if you imagine the tube network, like the metro, I'm on the very end of the city, but it's kind of in the countryside. So it's like 20 miles from the city.
Oh, that's not far.
Now,
say the name of the city again. Where you are? What's the name?
The city I'm in now is Cardiff in Wales. It's a couple of 100 miles away, but I grew up near London, like 20 miles from there, and that's why I'm moving back to soon.
Okay. I was in London, I guess just once, but it was spectacular. I don't know. Now, are you a Stern Show fan?
I didn't really get it over here. You know, I didn't get the station, I guess. But what I did.
Well, the reason I ask is you're not one of these guys that knows anything that I say. You're going to go, oh, I know that already.
I'm not. I'll say no. I'm not. I'm not a super fan, but I found Stern on old clips, like pirated clips on YouTube years ago. So I've caught a bunch of the.
Well, did you know we did a week of shows live from Abbey Road?
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
That's the one time I was in London. We were there for the Prince's Trust concert, and we're up in the catacombs before the concert interviewing people.
Wow.
And when we're on the road, I sat right next to Howard. So it was me and Howard and his sidekick, Robin. And sitting across the table from us was the Bee Gees singing a cappella. I mean, holy Christ, you know, I still get the chills. Is that 30 years ago? Whatever it was, I still get the chills, Carl. I'll tell you, it was so much fun.
Must have felt like a mushroom trip just being there at Abbey Road. Did you do did you get together and do the picture on the crosswalk?
No, we didn't do that, but I literally almost got killed. I was standing there, and the traffic goes a different way than in the United States. And you're used to looking, and then taking a cursory look and stepping out. But your cursory look is it the wrong way. And I went to step out, and Fred Norris, the other writer on the show, grabbed me literally by the scruff of my neck, pulled me back, and a bus went a foot in front of my face because the streets are very, I don't know about now, but they were very, very narrow.
Yeah,
so the bus came right next to the curb. And they say that now over there, they actually have things printed on the sidewalk that says, be careful, look both ways or whatever.
Yeah, well, that could have been the end of the book, Jackie. That could have been the end of the book right there, right?
That would have been the end of me, man. And it was, you know, we literally broadcast from that room where they did all those songs with George Martin in the early days. That exact room. It was just absolutely spectacular. And
I bet you can feel it in there, right? I bet you can feel like,
you know, I'm not one of those weird guys, and I'm telling you, you know, if there ever was such thing as a vibe or a haunting, it was like, it was spectacular. And I could tell, you know, reams and reams and reams about that. But I want to come back to London. So let's put on a show, and you can be the opening act and make me the headliner. And if all I make is airfare, I'm there. We'll have fun.
Listen, all you need to do is message me, man, and we'll sort something out. So that sounds good to me. And yeah, it sounds fantastic, and I'm glad you had a good time over here. But being in those locations, always, I kind of get into that weird stuff a little bit. But if I walk into somewhere and I know there's that much history, I do think, it does sort of.
It's all your mind. Your mind just goes to work, you know.
Yeah, for sure. But here's a couple of things I've been interested in, really, because you were talking about. I've literally been listening to that when you were talking about it in your book today, like about being a pioneer of the comedy album. Almost, you're one of the first guys just to go, I need to tape this and put it out on cassette, right?
You know, I had a band in the 70s, and I always hung microphones and recorded what we were doing because we told jokes in between songs. And I wanted to just have, hear what it sounded like. It was with no end game. And then I got a job in a recording studio after we made this infamous song called The Pot Song. And so I learned that any schmuck can have a record album. All you need is a master tape, which is just a tape, and a picture to put on the cover and a few dollars. It's like baking a cake. You need flour and sugar and an oven, but nobody knows that.
Yeah.
So I'd only been a comedian for 6 months, but when we started doing comedy, I was hanging 2 microphones. And I had an amplifier, a Fender amplifier that the guys in the studio rigged for me. So it had an actual XLR, which is a low impedance microphone input in the side. So I could plug a microphone right into the side of an amplifier. And that's how we did our shows, with the microphone going to the amp and the guitar going through the amp. And the way I recorded was I had these 2 microphones hanging in the crowd that went into the right side of the cassette player. And my voice coming out the back of the amplifier, another, a Y split into the left side. And I recorded the shows onto cassette and then mixed from the cassette to a reel-to-reel, the crowd on one side, me on the other side, but I put them together and mix them and chop it up with a razor blade and sent the master tape and a picture of my 8th grade class picture with me flipping the bird. And all of a sudden I had an album. Now, obviously, George Carlin had an album and Bill Cosby had an album. But these guys, this was major, major label big deals. Like the average schmuck did not have an album. Red Fox had albums, but even his albums were so low rent and sold under the counter. And all of a sudden, here's a guy with records, and I'm selling them at the door at my shows, and everybody's making fun of me. And then, 20 years later, there's not a person that does shows that doesn't sell their stuff at the door, And that's how I got in with Howard Stern. I sent my albums to Howard Stern. He's like, wow, This guy's got 3 comedy albums. He must be hot stuff. Meanwhile, I was just some schmuck that made albums,
Yeah, but they must have been good. They must have been good, So that's crazy to me for now to think you were just a few months in the game. You're thinking, I'm going to get these out there. It's wild, but it must have been quite the ride to put those out and see them. Even if you're selling a few at first at gigs and all that kind of stuff, and people start to get back to you, and like you said, to get on Stern from your own produced albums in the early 80s.
The story is really not believable. We're doing shows on a Tuesday night in a restaurant. And I said to my girlfriend at the time, I said, they laugh at every single joke I tell. I should make an album. And she says, so make an album. So I borrowed $100 from 15 different people. And that's how I put out an album. And it was a whole magical thing. And the stories of just selling that album, I got a whole book right there. The stories that you hear 20, 30, 40 years later. I did a show like a couple months ago where a guy came up and he said, look at this. And he showed me a copy of Going Ape, which was my second comedy LP. And it signed, congratulations. He said, you gave this to me for free at my bachelor party 35 years ago. And he says, and these are my sons. And he's got 3 kids in their 30s. And I did his bachelor party. I mean, like all of a sudden, the time span is like, Jesus Christ. That all boils down to, I'm really old, Carl. That's what...
Yeah, but it's amazing. Listen, you're still alive and kicking, and that's all good. But you're about the same age as my dad, I think. But it's amazing for something like that to come full circle as well and hit you again like 30 years later to see it.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And it was nice karma. Here I got the guy is giving birth to paying customers.
So what was the scene like back then when you were starting to put out those albums, the first couple of albums? I mean, the amount of comedians must have been reasonably small, right?
It was very, I remember a comic named Rick Overton. He's an actor. You might have heard of him, but he said one day, do you realize there's 150 of us? There's like thousands and thousands of brain surgeons, and there's only 150 of us. And now there's 150,000 comedians. But in those days, there was the comic strip, was the new place in New York City, and it was Catch a Rising Star, and there was the Comedy Store out in Los Angeles, but there was no comedy scene. And we started comedy on Long Island, me and another guy, at this restaurant in Huntington. We asked the guy, can we do comedy on Tuesday nights? And he said, yeah. And we got the door, and he got to sell drinks. And we actually paid the comics. So the comics used to come out from Manhattan, and it was a whole big deal. And that developed into the East Side Comedy Club, which was the godfather of Long Island comedy clubs. But that was a long year where I was producing shows everywhere. I'd say to bar owners, listen, if, take my comedy show. Instead of hearing loud rock and roll and crap, it's a lot quieter. It's fun. It's a nice crowd. You pay me X, and they'd pay me however much money, and I'd pay the comics and keep the difference. And I did shows all over Long Island. And I mean, I used to have to climb up and turn off the hockey games. It's a miracle I didn't get killed. And people staring at us. I remember going the first time Sam Kinison showed up. This guy was going to produce him, and we went out to do a show in New Jersey. And people thought they didn't know what they were watching because everything was so new. It wasn't comedy. All of a sudden, it was like, you're sitting here, and we're up there. And who the hell do you think you are that you're going to tell us jokes and make us laugh? But it wasn't hit and miss. It really was the Wild West. It honest to God was the Wild West, and you're worried about getting paid and everything, But looking back, like anything, it's so much more romantic. I mean, a lot of it sucked eggs so bad.
Those were the good days. But then when you're back there, you're like, can I eat today? Can I have some money, please?
I remember the first time I used to be in this band, and then I started playing guitar by myself. So I play the guitar and do my songs and tell my jokes. And the comics used to show up in the very early days, including like Eddie Murphy and Bob Nelson, because it was a place to go on stage. It didn't exist anywhere. And then I remember I got a job at this place called the Rainy Night House, and that was the first time I got paid for telling jokes and playing the guitar, as opposed to playing the guitar and telling jokes, which sounds very subtle, but that $20, that was my first, here's your money for being a comedian. It might have been 40, but that might be a lie. I think it was 20. But it was like, holy, it's the old, and we get paid for doing this moment. You know what I mean?
Phenomenal. So that feeling then, I know what it's like to get like a first drink ticket or just a few pounds, for doing comedy. That first time you get anything at all, it's like it doesn't even mean anything. You can buy a sandwich, but
any remuneration for doing what we do is like it never gets old, whether it's $5 or 5,000.
And isn't it wild though that people are giving you money for just the cliche dick jokes or whatever it is, right? But it is
I love it.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. But I'm getting starry-eyed now just thinking about that time because like you said, the scene was way smaller. It was different because comedy started as more of a cabaret thing anyway, wasn't it? It was they would have some jokes and music and that kind of stuff.
vaudeville. It's there's an incredible book. And you seem like you're into this. I don't know if you've ever heard of Chris Nesteroff. Do you know that name?
Not by name. I might recognize.
I will email you. It's called.
Okay. Yes, please.
I think it's called American Comedy, Thieves, Drunks, and Lowlives, and it just the history of comedy right from vaudeville all the way through, and it just jumps from person to person. But it's written. So this guy knows everything about everybody. And he touches on everything. And it's a fascinating overview of the whole thing. And the guy, if you're into him, then you go on his website and he goes so deep into everything. And, once you get hooked on it, it's like anything. Like if somebody's into the Civil War, you know what I'm saying? It's like you go deeper and deeper and the devil's in the details,
Yeah, for sure. I'm into any of that stuff. Any history of comedy, it's just fascinating for me. Any scene, whether it's LA, the Comedy Store, New York, Long Island. Now I'd always heard about Long Island, but I didn't really know too much about it. I've heard of Governors and I've heard of some of the clubs that are there now. But it's just it just seems like it was, like you said, it was the Wild West back then, and you were a pioneer, and that must feel weird. Just the fact that you were just part of that crew that was blazing a trail for comedians, I think.
I loved it. I actually started Governor's Comedy Shop. My soon-to-be wife, to be ex-wife, and me. There was a club that the amplifiers had gotten so loud that the people were screaming about the rock and roll. So this club owners decided, let's try comedy. And somebody said, well, let's get the guy with the dirty joke line. And I'd had a dirty joke phone line since we first started comedy. I said, we need a way to promote. And I started putting dirty jokes and advertisements on the phone. And here it is 43 years later, and it's still going. The same stupid joke line.
That is crazy.
516-922-WINE. I don't know how you dial it from England, but dial it. And, it's just me going, hello, this is Jackie. Thanks for using your finger. Two Jews walk into a bar. It's that simple,
Phenomenal. Yeah, I was just listening about that joke line in your book today, and it's just crazy. I mean, for people coming up now, they're going to think, well, you phoned a number and heard stuff, but I'm old enough to remember things like the speaking clock and weather you could call back in the 80s.
Right.
Yeah,
that was in the very beginning, and people say, "Oh, you must have made so much money." It cost me money forever. It's a local call. It literally was in my mother's attic.
Wow!
It was an answering machine in my mother's attic. Now it's an answering machine in my house. It was never an 800, and you make a fortune off it.
So your I mean, was that naivety at the time that you could have been stiffing people for money for listening to your jokes, or was it you just wanted it out there and a way for people to hear you?
It's hard to explain to anybody that's not from here, but any other state in the United States, you could walk in and say, I want an 800 number, and tell them what you want and plop down your money and get one. In New York State, to try and get an 800 number, you would be hard pressed to find somebody to ask who you can ask, who can ask. There's so much red tape. So I never even, and plus you needed thousands of dollars to get started. Yeah. So all I did was say, you know what, I'm just going to get a joke line and put the jokes on it, and hopefully people will call. And it was an instant terrific advertisement. It got me Governor's Comedy Shop, which made it worth everything. And it's made me infamous. So the stories about the stupid joke line go on, and it just never gets old. It's cost me money, but it's more than worth it in the long run. You know what I'm saying?
So how many people were? Yeah, of course it is. How many people were calling that in its prime? How many did you get data on that?
At the peak. This is hard to explain. It's not really hard to explain. After it was doing so well, I asked for a second line, and they said, we can't give you a second line because you're not in a business area. And believe it or not, and nobody, I never make up stories, but they're hard to believe. The guy said, wait a minute, are you the guy with the jokes? Because if you have something like a joke line, the people in the phone company, the first people that know it, pass it around. And I said, yeah. And he said, you know what? We're going to give you the second line, the rollover line. A couple of weeks later, I called up and said, I got to have more lines. They sent the foreman over. He came over into my mother's attic and looked, and just fascinated by these two answering machines, and gave me two more lines. Then I did it, and a different foreman came. Each time they came because they couldn't believe what was going on. And I got up to where I had 10 answering machines with 1 minute endless joke cassettes in. In other words, if you called, you got a minute's jokes, or a minute's message, and then it hung up. Rick Dees in California was the #1 DJ in LA, and he got hold of the thing and found out about it. And he told his listeners that 516-922-9463 was Tom Selleck's home phone number. Okay. Now try and picture this. Okay. There's 10 answering machines, and they're a rollover business line. So if you call, you get machine number 1. If somebody else calls and one is busy, you get machine number 2. If somebody else calls and 1 and 2 are engaged, you get machine number 3. Okay? If 6 machines are going and somebody calls, it rolls to the 7th machine. Okay? But you got to remember, the answering machines are 1 minute. So if 1's engaged, 2's engaged, 3's engaged, 4's engaged, and then somebody else calls, but the first machine is done, it goes to that machine. It always goes starting with number 1.
Right.
And we had a counter on the 10th machine. And the 10th machine would only go off if all the other 9 were engaged within 1 minute. And the counter on that 10th machine went to 99 like 5 times a day. Now, you got to picture the parabola or whatever you call it. We estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 calls a day. It could have been half that. It could have been 5 times that. And the amount of people that might have got busy signals, who knows? I met so many people over the years that said, my family hated you because their phone number was 1 digit off. So people in the middle of the night would be calling looking for the jokes, but they instead of 9463, they'd 9464, and they get Charlie's house,
Oh man.
And it was just insane. It was just so much fun. Just crazy, crazy, crazy. And it got me people, and nobody ever heard of me. They never saw the dial joke sticker. They heard from a friend, from a friend, from a friend, from a friend at work. It was,
They just heard about this crazy phone line, and it'll get passed around at school, work, wouldn't it? People just passing around. That's crazy. I kind of remember the back end of those days where you get those weird little numbers you could call. For sure, but Matt said that he first heard of you.
There were whole books full of the numbers where you could get your fortune read, or you could get different crazy stuff.
Yeah, I remember there was like sex lines and stuff. You get some husky voiced. Well, it sounded like a husky voiced lady, but it was probably like a 47-year-old man. And
right, and that was that was later. You called for a girl and you get some 87-year-old guy in Jersey.
So Matt Napo said he heard for you. I'm sure he's told you this. He heard of Jackie through the joke line, and he called it a lot. And Good Times magazine had it listed, so it must.
Oh yeah, we put it every place. Every time I did. Well, when I had Governor's Comedy Shop, I was booking the shows and hosting all the shows, and every ad in Newsday, which was the main newspaper on Long Island, in the ad it said, for a joke, call 516-922-WINE. So thousands and thousands of people on Long Island were seeing that every week after week after week, And we had mugs and shirts and yak. So it was beaten into the ground. But people called it because they have a new joke every day to tell their friends. It was, I wasn't making any money. It was, it was a little altruistic, but at the end of the day, it was an advertisement. You know what I mean?
It's a different world, because obviously now, with Twitter and stuff, everyone sees everything all the time. But back then you just heard something and then you would tell a friend, and that's how jokes went around. We were getting jokes in the playground about news stories, even about like Richard Gere and hamsters and stuff, were going around the world via word of mouth through schools. I don't know how they even crossed international borders, but we were hearing the same stuff people in the US were hearing.
That stuff just leaps around, just leaps around, long before Twitter and even the internet or anything,
Yeah, you get a little bit nostalgic for those days, I'm sure. But what would you say? So all those years you were getting up, you're getting used to getting paid now. When did you hit your first crazy night in live comedy? Like the first, whatever it is, like it could be anything wild that happened after the show, during the show, with the owner. Did anything get really wild in those early days? I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes.
Wild as far as women or money or
anything you can interpret.
It was so gradual, gradual, and then all of a sudden you get a great gig, and it can make or break you. Like when I hooked up with Rick Dees, I got to go out and work a couple shows at the Universal Amphitheater, which was spectacular, and I got to be in Red Fox's Dirty Jokes, which was a video with actually Bob Schimmel and a couple other. That everything is on the web now. That's on YouTube or wherever. I got to host the Rascals Comedy Hour, but once I got on Stern, as the Stern show got bigger, I got bigger. I wasn't especially better comic than this guy or that guy. Just like the Tin Man. What you need is a testimonial. You know what I mean? And so I charged more and more, and the more they pay you, the more they charge. And people just enjoy the show more when they spend $50 than when they spend $3. And that is just how it works, unfortunately. I paid $50 for this. I'm going to get my money's worth. And they come and they laugh. And, I like to think I filled the bill. I think that the crescendo of the whole thing was headlining at the top of the Riviera in Las Vegas.
Wow,
1,000 people sold out, just destroying the place, and having half the audience back into my suite afterwards. It was great. Luckily I was not a cocaine guy. When I started making some money, when the whole thing first started in the early 80s, I didn't have money, and the money I had, I put into my shows. And so, a lot of people went into the toilet with cocaine, but it was just never my thing. And once I started making some money, that was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't hardly smoke pot. I mainly drank Budweiser and told jokes, and told them a lot. If I wouldn't tell them on stage, I was telling them at the bar, at a party. That was just me. That was the real thing. People meet and go, wow, you're really that guy.
But it's always lucky not to get into cocaine. And I think in Vegas in the 80s, it was probably fucking crazy. So yeah, you avoided a good bullet there, I think. But yeah, Budweiser and joke sounds good enough for me.
Yeah, it's plenty. It's more than anybody could. It was almost more than I could handle.
What about bad experiences with club owners? It's people trying to undercut you or say it's not sold out because that chair's over there, like trying to stiff you on bonuses and that kind of stuff. Do you have any of that?
I was lucky because once we got going, I was making good money, and it was good enough money that I had to get paid by check. So for the most part, everything was above board. But of course, there was horrible. There was one owner that I haven't dealt with. I say 20 years, but it's probably been 30 years, because I worked the club, and I forget the exact numbers, but I think he was charging $10 at the door. And I would either get the door or I would get half the door. Maybe he was charging $20 at the door and I was getting half the door. And it was 200 seats. And it was in this Holiday Inn. And I worked there a bunch of times because it was right on the other side of the George Washington Bridge. And I do the show. After the Stern show, I go and check into my room and take a nap and come downstairs and do the show. And then it was a very simple, fun gig. It was 200 seats. So I'd get $10 times 200. But minus, if I looked out and there was some empty seats, I'd get paid for like 180, and it was fine. And then one day, for whatever reason, I got there early and I counted the chairs. And there were 250 seats. And I'm like, this guy's been beating me up for $500 every show, 3 or 4 times a year for the last 5 years. I was so enraged. I've never stopped telling everybody what a piece of dirt he was. Harlan Jameson from Bananas. And then he wound up having more clubs. Bananas, I worked in Poughkeepsie for him. I worked all over the place. And then, and I'm a fairly known guy. God knows how much he was beating everybody up. And
I was just thinking about that. If he's doing that to you, imagine what he's going to do to new comics with just naive.
But anytime you work in the door anywhere, it's at your own risk.
Yeah.
As recently as a year ago, I worked the club, and then the people said, the guy's lying. There were many more people than that. I'm like, you choose your battles. It's so tiring. And then somebody beats you up, and then you work for them again, and fool me once, But once again, it's a lot more fun in the retelling, I'll tell you one great story, and I don't think I put this in my book, and I don't think I even told Peter yet. There was this guy named Bob who had a club in New Jersey, and I did his club. And 3 years later, I did the same club for the same guy for literally 10 times more money. Okay. I got paid $200 when nobody knew who I was. 3 years later, I'm really well known on the Howard Stern show, and it's a local New Jersey place. So I got $2,000. Okay. And the guy was a drunk and a cokehead. And I remember so distinctly after the show, I sat in his office and he counted out $2,000 in 20s, in stacks of five 20s. And I picked up the stacks and I'm counting them. And one of the, I remember this just so clearly, one of the stacks, instead of having 5 20s, it had 8 20s. And I remember it just raced through my mind like, is this guy playing mind games to see if I'll be honest and say, wait, you gave me too much money? And I said, you know what? I'm gonna break balls here. I'm not gonna say anything and see if he says, hey, wait a minute, man, And so I just counted it. I said, $2,000. Thank you, Bob. He said, thank you. And I never found out if it was on purpose or whether he was just so coked up he made a mistake. But he didn't give me what there was 3 more than 5. Instead of 5, there were 8. That's a pretty big mistake. But I always thought that was just so weird, but it wasn't like it was short. If it was short, I would have said something,
Yeah, for sure. Like he's still fucking with you now. But yeah, if it's over, you never know. But maybe in the back of his mind, he just felt a little bit guilty for that time he was underpaying you.
Well, no. When the time he paid me $200, that's all I was worth at the time.
Okay, wow.
I worked in Florida where I worked the whole week and didn't get paid, and I worked in Ohio at a club, and I never got paid. But that's like 2 weeks out of all those years, so it wasn't, it wasn't a commonplace thing, but you always had to worry, and somebody had to go in. And I remember I worked so long ago with a guy named Rich Jenny, who was a monstrous, huge, successful, wonderful comedian. But it was so long ago that I was headlining, he was middling, and we worked in Augusta, Georgia. And the owner wasn't going to be there on the last night, on Sunday. I said, we got to go in there and get paid. Or else, Sunday, they're just going to say, I'm sorry, Michael's not here. And I walked in and I, in a nice way, demanded that we get paid that night. And Jenny's like, get my money too, And the guy was kind of put off that I was demanding it. But I'll tell you right now, I'm sure we would have left. What do you do? Your kids in 1983 in Augusta, Georgia. Who do you turn to? It's like I said, it's the Wild West, the wild goddamn West,
Madness. But they got a comment here on YouTube. Bob here, where's my $60, you bastard? Matt Napo playing games. What's I saying? Richard Jenny, funny. One of the best ever. Yeah, Richard Jenny's got a wild reputation for the amount of material he used to have, right?
Oh God, he just a wonderful, wonderful guy. And we had so much fun. We're on the road for, I think it was a month, just me and him in my car. And Jesus, crazy stories.
So where's your favorite market in the States to work? Is it home? Is it Long Island, or have you got a favorite place in the Midwest?
Yeah, it used to be Philadelphia. Jersey is always great. Philadelphia is always great. Lately, it's been Boston, because I've been working in Boston every August with a very, very funny guy that's been around as long as me, named Lenny Clark, and Christine, what's her face, and we do shows up in Boston every August, and it's 3 headliners, and it's just no heavy lifting, and it's so much fun. But for a long time, I really loved going to Boca Raton. There was a place called the New York Comedy Club, but that's been going probably for 10 years. But for 10 years, I was going there 3 times a year. It winds up just, there's no specific place, but it's the percentage of times the audiences are good. Like in Boca, the audiences were always good. In Boston, the audiences are always good. At Rascals Comedy Club in New Jersey, the audiences were always good. You can't always count on it everywhere, Yeah, but for sure, your favorite place floats. Your favorite place floats. Here on Long Island, there's a club called the Brokerage where, it's like it died and went to heaven fun for me to just go there and tell my jokes and kill them,
Yeah, it's nice to have someone nearby to go. So, how many albums did you make? Was it a dozen, 10 or 11? I was trying to look up earlier.
I put out 3 LPs in 79, 80, and 82 called What Did You Expect, Going Ape, and Normal People are People You Don't Know That Well. And then, of course, I put out cassettes that went along with them. In 1985, me and my partner, who became my wife and then became my ex-wife, put out a VHS tape called A Safe Distance from Genius, which is such a story because I was getting known. I was on the Howard Stern show one day a week and I was really getting known. So we handmade a VHS cassette out of the tapes I had. We handmade one cassette, and there was a place called Pine Hollow Video. It was the first video store in the area. And we put that one video cassette in Pine Hollow Video, and I'd advertise the entire tri-state area. If you want to watch Jackie's VHS tape, go to Pine Hollow Video. I'm talking not a box. I mean, one tape. And a bunch of people went in there, and the guy came to me and said, "Hey, I want to buy a bunch of those." So we went in and mass produced. So we had a VHS tape. And then a couple of years later, I did another one. We did another one called Who Farted, I Smelted. And that wound up on the Playboy channel, which is a whole nother story. And then all of a sudden CDs became the thing. And I said, all right, I'm going to start from the word go again. And all the jokes that I have, I'm going to pretend I haven't put them out yet. And starting with the first one, I put out 6 CDs that are all 80 minutes long with no repeated jokes. I put out The Joke Man, Sergeant Pecker, Hot Dogs and Donuts, Come Again, F. Jackie, and Snart. 6 comedy LPs. And they're all, you can get all 6 for $20. You download them. They're not hard CDs anymore. But you download all 6 from Oleo Records, and people they freak out. It's 500 minutes of nonstop, pretty rude jokes. Some I'm sure I should get canceled for because times were different 30 years ago. And but they're still fun. And I haven't really put out anything really since. I call radio shows and record them. I don't know if I sent you any of my David Feldman calls, but now that I know you, I'm going to send you some stuff that.
Yes, please. Anything.
It's going to blow you out of your seat because it's the filthiest stuff you've ever heard. And I've called this guy over 100 times, and the calls are between 8 and 15 minutes. And he can't believe that I don't run out of stuff. 100 phone calls, 110 phone calls with no repeated jokes. And I mean, it's pretty lewd. And you'll know half of them, but the half you don't know, you're going to go nuts,
It's phenomenal. See, I mean, it's so prolific. I'm not going to sit and blow smoke up your ass, but for someone just to be that prolific and hundreds of minutes with just nothing repeated is.
But Carl, they're just old jokes. They're the jokes I heard in the playground, but I've retained all of them, and I probably know more than anybody in the world. So, people say, "Well, you didn't write that stuff." Yeah, but when somebody goes on stage and does Hamlet, nobody yells, "Hey, you didn't write that." No, I don't write that. I perform it, and I perform it well. And if people are really enjoying it, who is anybody to judge? I think I get more laughs per minute than just about anybody because I make this stuff work. I hate when it starts like I'm blowing smoke up my own ass now, but
No, just retaining it though is such a skill. I mean, I struggle to remember my stuff, or I struggle to remember specials that I love now, even specials that I've seen 10 times. When I was younger, I would just have the whole thing. I could do the whole 40 minutes if you like from like a special that I love. But now my brain is just like, where's, even sometimes when I'm trying to do my own material, while I'm saying one thing, I'm having a little look around inside, like what's next, what's going on.
I don't want to scare you. I don't want to scare you. But wait till you're 74.
Yeah, listen. If I make it that far, you still got your shit together, Jackie. I'm struggling. I'm struggling. A good few decades before. But we did have a question here from about the Aristocrats. Which comic did it best? That's from Jamie Dykes, who was supposed to be on with me.
I have such a long story about that joke. In my pompous opinion, the best version of it was Gilbert's version, and Gilbert's version is like word for word the way I told it to him 30 years before. There was, long before there was an internet, I was voracious for jokes from the time I was a little kid. I mean, I bought joke books, I read joke books, but it's hard to explain. I don't even know why. And one day I was looking at a comic book or a magazine, and it had one of those book clubs. Any book, any 10 books for 99 cents. I don't know if they have those in England, just like the Columbia Record Club, any 12 records for $1. And meanwhile, you can't find any, right? And one of the books was Rationale of the Dirty Joke. And I said, well, that sounds like it's up my alley. So I sent for the book, whatever the other 9 books were firewood. And this book was incredible. It was this big, and it explained where the guy heard the jokes, where they came from. He was so pompous and pedantic, but he was kind enough to make the jokes themselves in italics. So if all you wanted to do was read the dirty jokes, you could go from dirty joke to dirty joke. And I was fascinated by this book. And at the end, and it was number 2 of a series. So I took the address from the forward, and this is how I got to Rodney Dangerfield, how I got to Howard Stern, how I got my job in high school. I mean, just by going after something. And I just wrote to this guy at this address and said, I love this book. I have no idea where to get a copy of the first. It's just 2 in a series. I got the second series. I wanted to get the first series. The bookstores had no idea. And I mailed it to him, and the guy was in France. And I got a letter back from the guy saying, I'm glad you enjoyed. I have 2 copies of my first book, and I don't need 2. I'll sell you one for $18. I sent him the cassettes of my band's jokes. I wasn't a comedian. I played music in a band, but I had the jokes in between.
Yeah.
I sent him those jokes, and I sent him the money. And he sent me the book, which, it's my treasured thing. So I had both of these guys' books. And it's, I knew most of the jokes in them, but the ones you didn't, it was just so exciting. And you got such a history, and it's a whole nother story about Rodney and everything. But at some point I looked at sometimes you start a book from the end, just being goofy, right? And this guy, Gershon Legman, his life premise is you are totally defined by what you think is funny, which is a pretty astute observation. So I looked, and the second series of this 2-book series, the last joke on the last page was the Aristocrats. Now, I had heard the joke a year before I discovered it in his book. It was told to me by a comic down in Fort Lauderdale in 1979, and I instantly loved the joke because so much, if you're a joke teller, it's a fun joke to tell. And it said, here's the granddaddy of the jokes. This is the guy's book. He says, this joke was told me by a guy who lived in a family in squalor with 2 parents that constantly battled but stayed together for 40 years for the good of the children. And this was his favorite joke. And there was the Aristocrats. And I was totally blown away because it was my favorite joke. And he described my family. And then 20 years later, I put out a book, a joke book. I got paid a lot of money by Simon & Schuster. And in homage to Gershon Legman, the last joke on the last page of my book was the Aristocrats. Okay? And cut to, 5 years later, whatever, Paul Provenza and Penn Jillette came to me and said, Martling, we have to put you in this movie. because we're doing a movie called The Aristocrats, and we did a search on The Aristocrats on the web, and we only got 2 hits, and they were both you. Because what I had done is on my website, I had put Gershon Legman's version of the book, of the joke, and then I put my version of the joke. And so I wound up being in a movie. Everybody in that movie is way more famous than I am, or more well known in the comedy world than I am, but they had to put me in it. But the truth is, most comics don't really tell jokes. No comics told that joke. I was the kind of guy that told jokes to the comics after shows, but that's because I was a joke teller. The people that did the joke in that movie, like Saget, did an incredible version because it was so disgusting and so descriptive and so horrible. But I would bet that was the only time he ever told the joke. I mean, it was a spectacular piece of performance. But Gilbert told it literally the way I told it to him. And he told it, I guess the version of the movie, I think, is the one that he did at the Hugh Hefner roast. But that it's like so many jokes. It's funny when you establish how disgusting it is. But if you go on too long, the whole thing, I hate to say the flavor is lost. But the whole thing, you don't need to go that crazy into it. You just establish how horrible it is and then do the punchline if you're looking to tell it as a joke, as opposed to a Shaggy Dog story that goes on and on. Like I'm sure you've heard Ernie the Boil Sucker. You know what I mean? That's a joke that can be 3 minutes long or it can be 33 minutes long, depending how long a ride you have. You know what I'm talking about? But that was so much fun to be in. And
it must have been amazing.
I was sitting next to Joe Franklin, old Joe Franklin, who was a broadcaster for 70 years, who was mentioned in that movie. And I was sitting next to him at the Directors Guild for a screening. And Sarah Silverman is in the movie, and she says, and then I walked into Joe Franklin's office and sat on the couch, and Joe sat next to me. And then she kind of looks into the sky, and she goes, and then he raped me. Totally being good. And Franklin sitting next to me, and he's like, gasped. And everybody's like, no, Joe, it's comedy. She's fooling around, Joe. Oh, it's just so funny. Oh, my God. What are the odds you're sitting there with him? I mean, he was an old friend, But that was a crazy, crazy movie and crazy, crazy fun, and I was thrilled and still am thrilled that I was part of it,
Yeah, I mean the cast is amazing. It's making me. I'm gonna go and rewatch that as well. It's just one of those things. It's just a phenomenal. It's a great premise. I mean, I guess that's a bit of a hook there. But what? Well,
one of the things. It's one of the horrible things. There's a couple jokes that are so horrible because the joke is referred to by the punchline, which sucks. Just I don't know if you know the joke. Nevertheless, but. Hey, tell the nevertheless. That's like tell to get to the other side. You know what I mean? It's named by the punchline, which is just a crime. But what are you going to do? It's interesting.
Yeah, that is pretty wild. That is. So you've been saying you've been doing some shows. Just to switch it up a bit before we'll wrap up soon to let you get on with your day, but. You've been doing some shows locally, and I guess the pandemic's been hitting stuff. People are cancelling because they're getting COVID and all that stuff. What are you looking forward to doing the most? I guess you're trying to get this documentary to these festivals this year. But are there any shows? What I would really like to
do is to take the documentary and screen the documentary, and then do Q&As afterwards. Because you would not believe how much interest there is. First, there's interest because if you've been around this long in comedy, people have questions, just like you have questions. But people are still so invested in the Stern Show.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the early days of it. And people never run out of questions. And they never get tired of talking about it. So I just like to go around, instead of just doing regular comedy act and comedy show, showing that documentary and then talking about it. Of course, that's going to lead to a million jokes. And that's what I really look forward to. I'll tell you, I've been doing a thing for about a year maybe called cameo.com. And it actually has gotten me through the stupid pandemic because people go on the web and hire you. You go to cameo.com/Jackie Martling, and you say, would you wish my friend Carl a happy birthday? He takes really immense stumps, and he loves Jewish jokes, and he's got a crazy wife who he beats regularly, whatever. People, they give me all these bullet points, and then I make a video and just hit all the bullet points. I got like 125 5-star reviews because I can go right down the line. I got jokes on everything, and you get it, and whoever you buy it for gets a video they get to keep for the rest of their lives, and it's full of jokes. And the most important thing is not the money, but sitting here and getting to tell 3, 5, 8 jokes and laugh and scream and howl. Carl, that's methadone to me. That's me doing a little piece of my act and laughing and getting those endorphins going. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's it's just like you go in the deli and make the guy behind the counter laugh. That goes in my column.
About, isn't it? That's still the dopamine hit. It's still the dopamine hits, and we talk about we can be nostalgic for just having a phone line to call, but now with technology, the good side of it is you can connect to people that have loved you and the Stern Show for 30 years, and you can give them something personal. They're going to hold on to that and show everyone.
People ask, they ask a question about the show and a question about me, or is this true or that true, and it's so funny. And people write to me. There's another thing I always tell people. If you want to drop me a line, it's jokeland@AOL.com. JOKELAND@AOL.com. I answer every email. People write to me and say, I read your book. I loved your book. I didn't know any of that stuff. And then I'll just send them a bunch of the unpublished chapters that hopefully are one day going to be the sequel to the book. And they go nuts. But, I just like sharing that crap. Now that you're reading the book, now I got to send you the unpublished chapters. I bet you'll get a kick out of them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm actually loving it. So I can't wait to finish that over the next couple of days. By the way, if you want to buy the book, I've got everything's in the link to this video. There's links to the Audible, the hardback, US and UK. I'll put other links. I'll put the link to your Jokeland website. I think it's probably already in there, actually. So just go and check all those links out.
My website is jokeland.com.
Yeah.
And I tell people, if you want to try and get my book on Amazon, you got to make sure you go to Jokeman Bow to Stern. Because if you just put Bow to Stern, you get a 7th grade sailing manual. And I'm not making that up. It's so funny. Because bow to stern is in nautical,
yeah, it's a great pun, by the way. But I think I've got the direct links to the book, all the versions in the description of the video. So go down. So yeah, the documentary is a big thing for this year. That Q&A thing sounds amazing. That is the best way to do it. I've seen these things in all kinds of genres, just documentary makers, filmmakers, and they'll take these things on a tour of theaters. And then, the director or the star will sit down and have a Q&A. The fans will love it. And like you said,
and then they buy a book and they sit there and they're one-on-one with people. And, a lot of comics don't like being with people. Me, my being in comedy came out of telling jokes and being with people. So I enjoy that. I want to come to England, see if I can understand what the hell they're saying.
Well, if you can understand me, you're halfway there. I was a bit worried about that.
Who I was pen pals for about 10 minutes with Benny Hill.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just such a big fan, and I wrote to him and said, hey, I want to help write one of your specials. And he said, well, you don't realize that what you're watching on TV is 20 years old, and the specials I do now, I do one a year, and if I didn't write them myself, I would, I'd dry up and die. And then he dried up and died, so, but he was a great
it's
character.
Crazy to me how, that early BBC comedy was made it over to America, and I was always fascinated. Every comic I've heard about talking about, but they watched Benny Hill when they were younger. I remember it in the evenings here, but that was a wild show for its time, just chasing women around.
Just so funny, just so funny. And we in my band in high school, we were terrible. We could barely play, but we had an incredible sax player who could play yakety sax. So every time Benny's chasing those girls, that's Yakety Sax by Boots Randolph. I'm like, holy mackerel, I'm back in high school, Phenomenal.
It is amazing. So there we go. You're going to get on with this documentary this year. You're going to get it to those festivals. You're going to kill it, I believe. We're hitting an hour, and you know what, Jackie? It's been phenomenal. But I'm gonna wrap it up and let you go because it has been a real pleasure to talk to you and to get that connection. You're welcome over here anytime. I'm going to come and visit Napo at some point in Long Island.
I want to tell you, I told Napo the same thing. If you get good response and people ask you questions, gather up whatever questions they have, and then let's do this again in a week or a month or a year, and we'll go over whatever questions they had, and we'll have some more fun.
Yeah, it'd be phenomenal. I'd absolutely love to. But in the meantime, have a great rest of the day. I'm sorry your dinner date didn't turn up. I'm sorry you were stood up today by your beautiful.
I haven't met this
Napo
yet. I want to see if in person he looks as much like the Groucho Marx caricature as he does on the web.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait to meet him in person as well. But hopefully I will this year. But I think he probably does. But in the meantime, Jack, it's been an absolute pleasure. Go and enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, let's meet up another time.
Thank you for your interest, man. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
No problem. Take it easy. Bye. There we go, Jackie Martling. Links to everything are in the description of this video. If you haven't already, please scroll down and subscribe. It's not that hard. It's a big fucking red button. Give it a like and a share, and we'll see you later. I'm going to bin this episode right now because you know why I'm tired. You know why I'm tired. I am going to bail. Follow Jackie. Go buy his book. I'm halfway through it now. It's The Jokeman Balderstern. All the links are in the bottom of this video. And yeah, there we go. Cheers, everyone. There we go. I froze again. I hit the goddamn desk. It was going so well, apart from the other two times that it did freeze. Listen, go and have a great night, guys. And I'm gonna go and just hug myself and make this hangover go away. Take it easy. We will see you soon with the last rites, maybe over the weekend. Nothing like yesterday. Get lost, Jackie Martling.